Hey everybody, Scott here again to talk to you about my new favorite color profile on the Sony A7 III camera, and that is Hybrid Log Gamma 3. Now that I've had a little bit of time to really put HLG 3 through the paces, I will first say that some of my initial tests probably are not as accurate as I assumed initially. I'll be the first to say that I got very excited about the possibilities, particularly in color fidelity, that I might have jumped the gun on some of the actual specs. And I've said before that I was a little unfair to S-Log. I think a more accurate comparison for Hybrid Log Gamma 3 would be S-Log 2, not necessarily S-Log 3, because their dynamic ranges are a little more similar, their color fidelity is a little more similar. I still have a lot of testing to do, and I'm still figuring out the Hybrid Log Gamma's dynamic range. I don't really have the scientific understanding to really do that test properly, nor do I have the tools to do that. I know a couple of you have made some great dynamic range videos that I've looked at. So if you have the capability to try Hybrid Log Gamma's dynamic range and make a video of that, I'd be really interested to see that for one. I'm going to try to avoid comparing specifically dynamic range here. Again, what my focus has been from the start is really color, flexibility, and fidelity, particularly through this method of taking the Hybrid Log Gamma Rec 2020 color space and shooting within that color space, and then making it backwards compatible for Rec 709 in order to have all that flexibility and fidelity within a tighter sandbox. There was speculation on my part as to whether or not this was an intention by Sony. I have since read that Sony is at least aware of backwards compatibility. Moving on to my sort of color process here. And many of you have asked, why are you not using Resolve, or you should try DaVinci Resolve, what have you. I love DaVinci Resolve. I grade nearly every short film that I've ever shot in DaVinci Resolve. For these purposes, one, I want to use a tool that's probably a little more standard. I know a lot of you guys use Premiere, but a lot of people use Final Cut 10. I don't, at the moment, have Premiere. I'd love to do a test with that down the road and a process with that down the road. But for now, I'm sticking with Final Cut because it's clean and it's simple and it's a little bit easier to convey the basics. I don't really want to dive into a complicated thing here, because I think using Resolve would be a bit of a distraction for the point that I'm trying to make. Also, again, in the spirit of being fair to S-Log 2, my footage is much better this time around. I've exposed it properly at 2 stops above what you would normally expose at. So there is a lot more color information there. And I'll be the first to say that some of my earlier tests were pretty unfair, by and large, because my S-Log 3 footage was not properly exposed. So there you have it. I will try to be as unbiased as possible about which of these is better, because I understand that your intentions and how you plan to use the tool is going to vary depending on your project, the look that you're trying to achieve, and the amount of post-processing that you are trying to implement. For me, I will just say, part of the reason I'm making these videos and part of the reason I'm so excited about Hybrid Log Gamma is that it very much, so far at least, fits into my purposes, which is good dynamic range. Again, I don't know the extent of how good it is, but good dynamic range, and even better, very flexible color that does not easily break apart and artifact. So, diving right into my process here in Final Cut Pro. First, I want to talk about LUTs and the intention of LUTs. So starting off, I have my Hybrid Log Gamma footage here. As I showed in the prior video, it comes in looking overexposed because Hybrid Log Gamma, it's an HDR format. It's intended for, at least HLG is intended for essentially direct to broadcast HDR. So you shoot your footage properly exposed and you put it up on an HDR TV and it will look as it's supposed to look. The colors will be great, the contrast, saturation, etc. But again, when you are just importing it into a Rec 709 color space without an HDR monitor, it's going to come in looking very overexposed like this, which goes into an important part of the process, which is the conversion. Now, in Final Cut 10, there is in fact a tool that is specific for this called HDR Tools. I'll just show you what it does. I don't love this tool because they don't specifically have a hybrid log gamma to Rec 709. It's not entirely accurate, but I will just show you. So I've applied this tool. So at least now, I'll show you without and with. At least now it's looking a lot more like an S-Log or an S-Log3, and you can grade within a normal 709 color space. So that is useful, but for my purposes, that's not how I like to work. So let's talk about LUTs. So I've received some interesting comments about LUTs that basically say, like, you shouldn't use LUTs on S-Log. S-Log is meant to be a middle of the road, middle range format that's out of the box cinematic, and then you tweak the colors and the contrast and the saturation, etc. I completely disagree with this because S-Log is a log format. So, you know, just about every movie we see now is shot on the Arri Alexa. The Arri Alexa, whether it's RAW or ProRes, is shooting in a log format for its picture profile. And but that doesn't mean that all their movies look super flat. Sometimes they do, or sometimes the TV shows you see are more kind of flat and loggy looking. But there are plenty of movies that are very contrasty and very saturated, and but are initially shot in a log format. So the intention of log is not to make things look flat or look cinematic, whatever that means. The intention of log is to have a format that is malleable as possible in post. So you have the option to bring back all that contrast. You have the option to keep it flat. You have the option to push the colors and mute certain colors and bring up certain colors, and you're retaining all that dynamic range. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, S-Log2 is absolutely meant to be flexible. All that to say, LUTs, I think, often are improperly misunderstood, and I do think that LUTs often are misused. It's treated like a grade, essentially. Like, it's like, I throw a LUT on there, and then it looks cinematic because it's teal and orange and whatever else. That's certainly an application of a LUT, but that's not really a proper understanding of the initial intention of LUTs. So part of the reason I don't like to use a lot of these goofy LUTs that people put out there, a lot of folks will be like, purchase my LUT pack, you know, and their footage is teal and orange and pretty and stuff like that. And that's fine. If you want to use that and that's easy for your process, go for that. But the initial intention of LUTs is to basically replicate a process of choosing film stocks and basically choosing an initial kind of like negative look and an initial print look. And so I'll explain what that means. So when you shoot on a film, you shoot on your camera negative. So if you're treating LUTs that way, in this particular LUT pack, and I don't want you guys to get hung up on what LUTs I have, because again, like, choose the LUT that works for your project and that you like. I wouldn't recommend just, you know, hijacking exactly what I'm doing here. I mean, you can if you want to, but it just totally depends on what you're trying to achieve. But for me, so I try to use film stock LUTs. So starting off, I need a LUT that is log based because we're working in hybrid log gamma. I'm no longer using S-Log2 LUTs for HLG. I'm using a generic log LUT. It's a Vision 3 Kodak film stock that I really like. To start off, you need that LUT to represent a film negative. So in this case, I'm using a log generic format, and then I am starting with my film stock that I like, film negative. Sin means that it's intended to replicate a film negative. And when you do that, it will basically flatten out your footage and make it look very, well, log-like, because log is meant to replicate your traditional film negatives. They're very kind of flat. This is the most important step. I talk about that backwards compatibility. So Initially, also, I was doing this wrong. I was doing Rec 2020 to Rec 709. That's not entirely accurate. We do have the option for Rec 2020 HLG, specifically input and then output to Rec 709, which is also part of my problem with using Resolve at this point, is the current version that I have does not have a specific Rec 2020 HLG input. I'm sure current versions do. I just don't have it yet. So again, I'm not going to play with that right now. Then for mix, I have it pretty close to 100% because it can handle that. And as you see, if I back it off, you start introducing kind of blown out highlights and a little bit more of that HLG look. I want it, in this case, to look as closely to my film stock as possible. So you have your print LUT, and the whole idea is that you start with your digital negative. In traditional film, you start there. Even in digital film, you start with your digital negative, and sometimes that begins with a LUT as well. And then you have your digital intermediate, which is your grade. And then after that, you have your print stock. So traditionally, to ensure that films looked the same, your film prints look the same from theater to theater, there was a standardized print stock, which was traditionally Kodak 2393, or before that, Kodak 2383. So what's nice here is digitally, I can just go ahead and turn on my print stock, knowing that this is how it's going to print. So I'm starting with my film negative, ending with my print stock, and then you've got the digital intermediate, which is your grade, which is where you manipulate your color and your exposure, and that's in between these two steps. And it's important to make sure your coloring is between your negative and your print. And again, this is not always how you need to use LUTs. Sometimes you can, I'll be the first to say that I've often just used one LUT and, converted my look and then done some coloring. But this is the proper way if you're trying to treat LUTs as they're intended, as actual film stocks. I'm going to turn on my grade, which I've already done. I'm going to hop on over to S-Log2. It's the same exact thing. And again, I've properly exposed this as at +2 stops. This is at 0, 0. That's the proper way that I found to expose hybrid log gamma. But as you know, S-Log2 favors overexposure. So I've got my negative, which is representative of S-Log2. S-Log2 is a Rec 709 format, so we keep these the same. Input and output still Rec 709. The mix, I've backed off the mix a little bit because S-Log2 is already pretty loggy, and it just, in the end mix, it looks better this way. Then same thing, I've got my Cineon to Kodak 2393 print LUT, which you can see here is a Cineon print LUT. And I know you guys are all going to be like, what are these LUTs you're using? Where do I get them? That's fine. Steal my secrets. Just kidding. So yeah, print LUT. Whoop. The DI. Or my color correction. So this time around too, in fairness and accuracy, I have the waveforms up. So pay attention to the waveforms, and we've got these two clips to compare. So I've got my hybrid log gamma clip here and my S-Log2 clip here. Hybrid log gamma, S-Log2. Let me pull these up full screen and sort of play through them. It's going to go a little bit slow because I'm, running Camtasia and these have not rendered. So this is my hybrid log gamma. And again, I'm just going to say this. I'm not going to bash on S-Log2 this time around, but for what I am looking for, and if you are looking for the look of S-Log2, that's great. I'm not going to say that you're wrong. For your purposes, if that works, go for it. But what I am loving so far about hybrid log gamma is the color fidelity and flexibility and complexity. So you can see in the shadows, there's a specific tone, and then you can see all this gradation that's constantly changing, and there's so much detail. It's It's not duotonal, so it's not like the light side of my face and the dark side. There's so much nuance in the dark side here. There's so much nuance in the brighter side here, and there's also obviously a lot of detail. I don't have sharpening turned on or anything like that. I have the detail set, I think, to -2 for my hybrid log gamma. There's just so much nuance. And I wanted to do a shot that had skin tones because I think, to me, that's one of the most important things. And one of the things that's been so lacking in Sony products up until this point. Also, just looking at the color and the noise, you'll see there's no artifacting. There's very tight, beautiful noise. You could overlay a film scan and you wouldn't even see the noise, but there's no artifacting. It's just beautiful. Okay, so let's keep playing. Let me scrub on over to S-Log2. Okay, so in fairness to S-Log2 this time around, it's looking pretty good. It's retaining a good amount of color detail considering how far it's been pushed. It's looking quite similar to hybrid log gamma. There's much more softness in the highlights, which maybe you like, maybe you don't. Again, I'm not going to go into like how dynamic range is defined because, you know, what is interesting here is I do have a lot of range between punchier highlights and inkier blacks, and there's still so much detail, but at the same time, this is soft and it's filmic and it is pleasing. And there's still a lot of impressive detailing, and there's not terrible artifacting. You can see artifacting here, sort of these rainbow gradations here. But yeah, you probably wouldn't push the color much further than this anyway. You probably wouldn't push the exposure much further than this anyway for S-Log2. So to defend it from my last video, it's doing pretty good. And looking at the waveforms here, for HLG3, you're getting a nice saturated curve here, but it's still nice and soft, good dynamic range. You're getting a lot of detail in the skin tones over here, as you can see. And even, yeah, some good detail in this sort of blue side of the room here. And then looking, so HLG3, S-Log2. HLG3, S-Log2. And both are graded to be pretty similar. To me, S-Log2, where it's lacking is kind of these mid-tones. There seems to be a lot less detail there. Hybrid log gamma 3. And those are kind of those skin tones, again, which are very important to me. S-Log2. And also, if you look at sort of the blues over here, not as much complexity, it's just kind of flattening out. But pretty close. And I'm sure somebody who knows more about color and color science is going to look at this and tell me I'm an idiot and be like, what are you talking about? And that's fine. And actually, one thing I'll say for S-Log2 is in these kind of mid-tones, there's a lot more variance in exposure. There's a lot more gradation and variance. But I think that's weighed out in the color detail over here. So again, it's not to say this time around, I'm not going to say that one is better than the other. I do think, though, that hybrid log gamma is a little more flexible. And so let's also just take a look at this. And I've got the saturation up a little bit, but I can bump it up all the way to there. Still very little, if any, color artifacting. I mean, I can see something here, but that's nothing. Whereas if I push my S-Log any further, which again, you probably wouldn't, but it's supposed to be a flexible format, you know? Like, there are plenty of movies shot on the ARRI Alexa that are in C-Log that are very punchy and saturated, so you should have that option. And as you can see, my saturation levels are already actually pretty high. So let's just punch it up there, get it closer, just take a look, and take a look at the waveforms, if they load. Hybrid log gamma. S-Log2. There's a lot of difference. You can see in the midtones, there's a lot of difference in the variation and the variances. Not terrible. Not terrible. I will concede that. And again, form your own opinions on this, but I'm not loving these artifacts here. They're these sort of rainbow artifacts here, but this is holding up pretty good. Also, I do feel like my skin tone or my skin is much more simple here. It's borderline duotonal. You know, you've kind of got a tone here that's a little muddy, and then you've got a tone here. Obviously, there's definitely more complexity to that. You know, you've got this tone and these tones here. But by comparison, I see a lot more tonal detail. Very, very nuanced tonal detail here. And I just like the color tones as well. There's just a little more life in it. Maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I'm wrong. I just think there's just a little more life to the color. This, to me, I look a little more dead. And this looks a little more living and breathing. And again, this grade is not perfect. A lot more time could be spent on this, and this is all natural light. This is just me sitting by a window. Obviously, more effort could be put into the lighting, etc. But I hope this gives you an idea of my initial hypothesis, which is that you get some glorious color detail, complexity, and fidelity out of hybrid log gamma. And I'm not using S-Log2 here to say how much worse it is. I'm using it as a baseline for something that you all know and many of you love, and you can really compare and see the differences here. So thank you guys for watching. I will be the first to say that I'm probably wrong in a lot of what I say, but I hope this is educational and informative to you guys, and please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and hopefully we can get some more videos going. I also do want to release some of my test footage as well as their own videos, so you could just kind of look at them, look at the specs, and compare them without having to hear my voice drone on forever. So thank you very much. Please subscribe, and please like and comment. Thank you.